on the rhetorical appeal of alternative news sources. I'm Jay Bourne from Asbury College, and we have three presenters today. David Grassman from Center College could not be with us this whole week.
Right.
So yeah.
He's updating his website.
Yeah. So our first presenter is going to be Robert Glenn from Owensboro Community College. He'll talk about credibility of controversial internet news reports, and James Reppert from Southern Arkansas University will be our second presenter, and we'll finish up with Gary Deaton from Transylvania University. So, go ahead.
Okay. I want you to just imagine for a moment that you were coming home and turn on your computer and someone sends you an email, you access it, and it has really private, personal information that if it were to get out about you, and a lot of it isn't necessarily accurately framed, could destroy your public image or possibly cause serious personal harm, loss of the job, destruction of primary relationship, loss of personal possessions. Well, then take that scenario and project it into someone's website. And you have Matt Drudge, you have the Drudge Report, and you have a lot of the false, inaccurate situations that can easily occur, not just because there are people out there who are not, quote, true journalists in terms of meeting any kind of relevant, objective standard of what good reporting is, but also people who admit they're not journalists, but project and produce informational reports and put items on the internet in the form of websites and even Usenet files that truly contain a lot of inaccuracies. And the perspective I want to take in looking at this is I'm basically going to look at three areas. Look first at the positive aspects of the internet as a news source. Second, look at the negative aspects, and then finally suggest some solutions. Probably the most prominent situation that we've had that highlights the problems with accessing news information or news content from the internet is the Monica Lewinsky matter. We have a story in the Lewinsky matter which some journalists, including George, will identify as a non-story story. And it really is, in some respects. The issue that the media is covering is the alleged prurient activities of the sitting president, and the fact that some of those activities may or may not have occurred in the West Wing of the White House and other venues, such as if you go to the less mainstream media, there are stories that there was a campaign plane and a Mile High Club going on. But again, it depends what source you are willing to access and believe. One of the problems with that then is that the real story isn't whether he did or didn't, it's did he have someone to lie about what he may have done or not done. And that's the problem. The public doesn't necessarily see those layers of meaning and interpretation. Good morning, come on in.
Good morning.
They simply see a headline. And as most of us know, they may not read the full story. And they certainly, more importantly, are probably not going to look at who is writing this and why are they writing this and when are they writing this. And those are some of the issues that I want to get into this morning. Probably this issue was most strenuously highlighted when Matt Drudge, whose prior claim to fame in terms of connection with the media was as a clerk at the gift shop at CBS BlackRock headquarters in New York, initially created his own website based on reviewing 35 newspapers a week, plus accessing email responses that people would send him, tips they would send him, as well as looking through numerous other publications and accessing other websites. Most journalists prior to what occurred with Sidney Blumenthal indicated that the accuracy of his reports about various political issues and social issues was about 80 to 95% accurate. Well, in the days of Edward R. Murrow during World War II, I don't think 80 to 95% accuracy of your story reporting would have been considered, quote, good journalism, and I still don't think it is today. And I think most people that are teaching journalism school certainly don't aim for an 80% success rate in terms of verifying your story truth and verifying the veracity of your sources. So that's a little scary. But Drudge says, I'm not a journalist. And that's one of the problems you have with the internet is the nature of the technology. People putting information out there who have no credentials, and two say, and I don't have credentials, and I'm just having a good time. And until Drudge actually got to a point where he's beginning to turn this into a money-making enterprise, first he hooked up with Wired magazine, and then he hooked up with American Online, and it was with American Online that he got, basically they had deeper pockets than he did, when he made, basically printed as fact, a claim that Sidney Blumenthal, a White House aide, had a past as a sexual harasser and domestic abuser with his wife. This claim, at least according to the Blumenthals, both husband and wife, are untrue, and they quickly filed a $30 million lawsuit against Drudge. Now, my understanding is Drudge immediately retracted the story, apologized for it, and it's still questionable whether that case will ever go to court. I think it was more saber rattling on the part of the Blumenthals, given all the other stuff that was going on in the White House at the time. But the point is, nothing can ever be truer that once your reputation has been sullied, you can get all the money you want, but you can't get your reputation back. It's too tough. Think about Michael Jackson. I mean, he'll never get his reputation back, no matter how true or untrue the claims of some of the stuff the pop singer. We'll never really know the truth because it's very hard. The press it's much easier to print damning claims against someone than it is to retract. Who really reads retractions? Not too many people. How many of us go and look at the small print that says, "Sorry, we mislabeled Jimmy in the photo yesterday"? Very few of us. We go to the headlines. We go for the big stuff. All right. And the internet makes reporting all the more difficult. Number one, but it makes it essential. The internet, take it or leave it, is become, and the internet is not an amorphous term. Clearly, there are lots of different segments to the internet, lots of different layers of the internet, but I'll focus mainly on worldwide websites. One of the things that happens is that the internet, particularly by our students, and I take an educational perspective on this, is viewed as somehow, because it's electronic and it has a screen like TV, that it must be, if it's there, it must be true. And that if someone has a website, they must be a credible source. But just this past fall, as debate coaches, Gary and Jay may be familiar with this example, we had Tom Gray. And Tom Gray is president of the National Coalition Against Legalized Gambling. And he has a website. And of course it has all the logical stuff about why gambling is bad for society and people, and states shouldn't legalize it. Tom Gray is basically a former Vietnam vet who's been in and out of veterans hospitals. He does not have an office. He lives out of his car. And if you hear him talk, he seems a little short of a load. But he has this website, and a lot of debaters were accessing the website like this guy. Hey, he's president of the National Coalition Against Legalized Gambling. He must be a credible source. Well, we all know that doesn't necessarily make him a credible source. Just because you can throw a website together doesn't make you a credible information source. And so that was one of the problems we dealt with. On the other hand, we had what seemed to be, in theory, very reputable sources. We had an accounting firm, Arthur Andersen Consultants, put a report out that said that gambling was good for the economy. And gambling did all these great things. If you legalize gambling, it'll employ people, it'll rebuild depressed downtown areas, etc. Come to find out, to some of the more savvy people who were hearing this report, went, well, Arthur Andersen, because he did this report. Do accountants work for themselves? No. Who hired them? Oh, gee, the American Gambling Association. Who are they? A group of casino operators who paid Arthur Andersen to put a report together. Now, we could say Arthur Andersen's objective or not, but the point is who hired them, who's paying their salary. And so you get into a real problem with that topic, a lot of internet research, that you don't really know who's credible because you have to pull back different layers of the onion to figure out who put the page together, why did they do it, and where do they get their information. Okay? All right, one of the other things that happens is that more and more corporations and organizations are becoming their own journalists by putting their own websites together. A recent example that I personally experienced is Nevada Power. They are the fastest growing provider of electricity to southern Nevada and Arizona. And there was a report that they were going to, the local newspaper, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, printed a report that said that Nevada Power was going to be sued by a smaller electric company for poaching on their territory, because the whole, as some of you may know, the utility industry is about to be deregulated. We're going to have mass chaos, kind of like we did with the telephone industry in the late 70s and early 80s. Nevada Power has a new website, just fully up and operational in the last 30 days. And they came right out and said, that's not true. We fully refute all that. And so what you've got now is, we don't even have, quote, journalists who are from a third-party agency reporting. Now we have the sources themselves coming right out and remanding stories and countering them. So we have this very fluid basis for really what is truth, there are going to be different layers, and we really don't need to have that third party intercede to at least get dual perspectives. But the problem is the third party has to almost be the arbiter of how true are these sources. How true is Nevada Power's claim they're not going to be sued and they didn't do anything wrong versus this other agency. I mean, obviously, if you're not a player in the game, if you're not on the internet, that's a real problem. I mean, you've got to be in the game. And to that end, 35% of newspapers as of the fall of 1997 have their own website versions now. Our own local newspaper, the Owensboro Messenger Inquirer, recently went online. And of course, the major publications like CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post, just about any major newspaper you can name have had websites now for almost going on 2 years or longer. The other thing, of course, is that a lot of the things that occur in terms of stories, the line has become significantly blurred in the last year or two between what is news, what is a true story, and what is not a true story. More and more in the race to deal with, like the Lewinsky story, more and more mainstream news media sources are finding they're going to be left out of the ballgame if they don't use the internet as a journalistic resource. More and more journalism schools are actually developing classes that say how to use the internet as an essential component of journalistic research. And one of the problems with that is that if you go and you access something like the Drudge Report and you don't verify it, you just print what's there because it's, quote, on the internet, you're going to have some real problems in terms of libel, in terms of your credibility. The Dallas Morning News, as some of you may have read, had a story where there was and later the guy did come out, but a retired Secret Service agent who was on White House detail who claimed he saw the president and Monica Lewinsky alone and I think as I recall, I think it was a film viewing room that's located somewhere in the White House. Well, the very next day, the Dallas Morning News came out and said, we're going to retract the story. They pulled it off the internet, and they said, we can't verify this, which was a responsible act. But on the other hand, you can argue that it was a little late because the story, in the old days, such a story would have never even been reported. It never would have seen the light of day. I mean, the National Enquirer saying that a president or a celebrity has done things that are very prurient, or we could argue immoral, is not a new thing. But the fact that now we have NBC and CBS and ABC and PBS running out and reporting the story as if it's absolute truth without verifying it is horrifying. And in a competitive information marketplace, the big danger of this is that there's simply too much information. And there isn't enough time for the average person who accesses the internet to be able to say, gee, did they check their sources? That's not something you think of when you open the daily newspaper or access an internet site. I don't read a CNN report on their online version and go, oh, is that true? I read it and I tend to believe it. And so there's got to be a much better job done of verifying these stories before they get online. They should not be put online just as a story that's questionable without supporting sources that are deemed to be credible shouldn't be published in a newspaper. And I think that's really where we're heading in terms of libel laws. The other thing is that we'll talk about the positive aspects of internet online journalism. First, you get a quick turnaround on stories, which in an emergency is a good thing. For instance, the earthquake in California, there was lots of information posted on the internet by governmental agencies, and because you can link sites, you can get a lot of information just from linking up to one site from a lot of different sources. And so for journalists, that's a good thing. They don't have to drive to the Caltrans office, for instance, to interview somebody if they've already put out a blanket statement about what Caltrans, which, by the way, for the uninitiated, Caltrans is like the transportation department of the state of California. And during the earthquake in LA several years ago, they had a lot of notices about what roads were closed, what their timetable was going to be to repair freeways that have been damaged, things like that. But if you don't have to get in your car and drive to the source and interview them, and that's repetitive, of course, I'm sure they're going to be interviewed about the same story numerous times. They can put out a press release, it's on the internet, that saves the journalist time, and it also saves the supporting institution money. So it's good in that sense. And certainly on a global level, instead of having to travel and send somebody to Pakistan, if they have some political insurrection, you can simply access the internet and get a lot of information you would otherwise never have access to. So it's really good in that sense. On the other hand, there's really no way to verify the truth of the stories or truth or credibility of some of the website operators. And that's particularly true of web pages that appear to be newsy or present journalistic type mantra, and Drudge is an example of this, but there are others. There was one particular website I accessed that had sort of a news format, and it was an couldn't believe there was such a thing, an anti-Promise Keepers webpage, and they was full of all of these right-wing Christian coalition guys saying they go too far and going into explicit doctrinaire explanations of why the Promise Keepers were an evil thing for ministers to be advocating in their churches. And of course, again, you can't know the credibility, kind of like Tom Gray again, of that agency without seeing a face. And so getting to the negative aspects, that's one problem we have. We don't know who the faces are and what they look like and what they really sound like, when they're exposed to a camera, and we get to see what they really look like and actually examine their backgrounds. And that's a real problem with some of the people that quote are journalists on the internet. And second, the line of what it means to be a journalist. Anybody who can set up a website and can type can be, quote, a journalist, or at least maybe not a journalist in the traditional sense, a news disseminator. And that's a problem because you don't have the system of checks and balances. The other thing, of course, is that major news organizations are losing the battle. They're losing the battle to the internet. They're losing the battle to all the alternative news sources that are on cable. The average of the three major networks, every year, their percentage of viewers watching the evening newscast decreases. Why? Because I don't have to wait till 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock to get my national news. I don't need to wait for Tom, Peter, and Dan to light up, turn on the lights and start talking to me. I can get news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anytime I want. The problem they know is that the natural process of collecting news, which is often sped up, and in libel suits, it's not uncommon for a journalist to say, well, the reason this was fact, this false claim was reported was I didn't have enough time to verify it, or I had to get the story out and I was rushed. Well, the internet makes that natural cycle even 10 times faster because you're competing with other news sources, and if you don't report the story that you think is true, but you can't maybe get as many sources to verify it as you'd like, you are at a competitive disadvantage. And I think that's the biggest thing that's true, and that's particularly true for less prominent agencies, because how do you compete with Reuters? How do you compete with Associated Press with all their money and all their resources? The other thing, of course, is the level of civility. When is a story not a story? I mean, I think you can honestly say that whether the president did or did not have intimate liaisons with other women, while it's interesting, it's certainly prurient, keeps me awake, it doesn't mean it's news. And that's what the news media fails to focus on. They don't pull back and allow people to look at what should be news and what shouldn't. And I think more and more, particularly as the space and the available resources become more and more strained, and we begin to see some people drop off in the marketplace due to the fact they can't compete, one of the big questions that's got to be addressed with this technology is better restraint, better journalism, not in terms of not in terms of how we print, but what we print. What do we include in the web page? What do we include in our online version? Because there's a real significant problem with stuff that's on there that just clogs and clutters the information landscape. That's basically some of the things I found in reviewing a number of informational sources about internet journalism. It's an interesting frontier. It means we'll have more information available to us at our fingertips than ever before. But I would close with this example. There is never a substitute for having a face-to-face interaction with the news source. Think about how much we really learn about the souls of people and about their true veracity as sources when we look into their eyes. And that's what we lose with the internet when you have someone that does a majority of their research through cyberspace, is that lack of physical contact. How did anyone determine that Kathleen Willey was a credible source? They didn't just have a chat room discussion with her. Ed Bradley sat down and looked into her eyes. And that's the way that ultimately these stories need to be verified, in face-to-face, direct human-to-human contact, not solely through a phone call, a fax, a page message, or an internet email.
Thanks. Our next presenter is James Shepard.
The focus of my presentation this morning is slightly different than is listed on your convention materials. I feel very strongly in the idea of presenting minority role models to my students at Southern Arkansas University. What we have, essentially, depending upon the year, is an African American population of roughly 18 to 22%. Unfortunately, we are for all intents and purposes, geographically isolated. One of the things I mentioned on the videotape you'll be watching in just a couple of moments is that we are roughly about 90 minutes from Shreveport, the closest local market, and 2 hours from Little Rock. One of the things I've tried to do in my classes is to not only talk about issues dealing with African American perspectives on journalism, both print and broadcast, but also give students an opportunity to have their work seen in local and regional markets. For instance, early in the 1990s, we reached an agreement with the NBC affiliate in Monroe, Louisiana, to have student-produced news reports from my electronic news gathering and advanced electronic news gathering classes shown on a weekly basis on the morning news and also on the Sunday evening news. This was an agreement that was also reached with Northeast Louisiana University. And this was a good opportunity for all students, including minorities, to look at issues and have basically what amounted to a video audition tape presented to a wide audience. And we're doing that again with all of our students in a couple of areas. We have a 30-minute weekly cable program that is seen on 5 Southwest Arkansas cable TV affiliates. We have a college radio program that is heard in 6 markets each week, and something that we just reached an agreement with a couple of weeks ago with the ABC affiliate in Shreveport, Louisiana. They have something which is called First News 3. It's the top-ranked early morning newscast in the market. And all of my students, including a very heavy population of African American students, now have the opportunity, like we've had in the past with KTVE-TV in Monroe, to see their edited news projects on a wide basis to people in what is called the Arklatex. And what I have done with my classes early on is to prepare a 17-minute mini documentary which explains some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about in the mass communication program at my institution. And some of these materials will also be available on our website when we have audio and video materials available. One of the focuses that you may see on, for instance, the Black Entertainment website is all video clips, an exclusive interview held by Tavis Smiley, who is the BET Tonight host, with President Clinton. And of course, very recently there was a program on BET that I videotaped and will show clips of to my students, a program titled Empowering Our Communities, where again Tavis Smiley, the main BET Tonight host, talks to Vice President Al Gore. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, I believe the host is deferring too much. Al Gore really takes over as the host. It's almost like he's playing the crowd as a precursor to the 2000 presidential election. In my particular case, so like I said, the main focus of my presentation is a mini documentary. This includes a number of different edited clips and my voiceovers. It explains a little bit about my university and some of the things that we have done in the past few years. Now I got it. Thank you. Microphone, Jason. There we go.
In 1909 is a state-supported institution of approximately 2,500 students. About 18% of the student population is African American, and many are broadcast journalism majors. Magnolia, Arkansas is located in a rural southwestern portion of the state, 2 hours from Little Rock and 90 minutes from Shreveport, Louisiana, the closest television news markets. It is a largely agrarian environment where long distances to major markets make it difficult to schedule regular guest speakers or field trips. Under these circumstances, how can African American broadcast journalism majors gain a perspective on role models in mass communication? This program will chronicle the ways by which the broadcast journalism sequence at Southern Arkansas University allows African American students as many opportunities as possible to analyze role models from a number of perspectives. The first required course for broadcast journalism majors is Introduction to Mass Media, which primarily focuses on issues in mass communication. Each area studied in the course involves sections dealing with multicultural and African American perspectives on matters related to broadcasting. Television is an essential teaching tool here, as it serves to refract many societal concerns and effects. Controversial issues of public importance involving the African American community can be shown and discussed with students, in addition to serving as a jumping-off point for research papers. Critical thinking skills are important in these cases, and viewing subjects relevant to African Americans gives introductory students of all races proper bases of analysis for future courses they will take in the broadcast journalism sequence. For example, the 1990 Andy Rooney controversy was an important one to discuss in class, as it showed that even civil rights advocates can stumble when it comes to personal viewpoints.
What do I say to defend myself? Do I say I am not a racist? Sounds like saying I am not a crook. How do I apologize to homosexuals for hurting them with a remark I made that I didn't realize would hurt them? It's demeaning to have to sit here and defend myself. In the Army in World War II, I was infuriated to find that black soldiers had to sit in the back of the bus. I got on a bus in St. Augustine one day to go back to Camp Landing, and I insisted on sitting in the back with a black guy. I was arrested. In 1970, I set out with a camera crew to find out what happened to the man who was twice tried for the murder of that great civil rights leader, Medgar Evers. I was arrested and dragged into court in Jackson, Mississippi by two redneck sheriffs who didn't like what we were doing.
Andy Rooney says he didn't make the remark. Shouldn't the network stand behind its correspondent?
In the face of a flat and firm denial, you're right, Pat, but his statement subsequent to his suspension undercut his own denial. He says in his statement that he understands that he has placed David Burke, the president of CBS News, in a difficult position, and he therefore accepts this suspension that's going to cost him about $200,000 at the very least. My point is, if you didn't say it, you're certainly not going to express understanding of your suspension, and you're going to fight this thing. I think after the lengthy meeting he had with CBS, he clearly admitted in some fashion or form that he made the remarks.
The death of Arthur Ashe, who was laid to rest in Richmond, Virginia earlier this week, brought up two important reporting ethical questions for students. How did a role model such as Ashe deal with the specter of having his illness outed by USA Today? Additionally, how is his extraordinary dignity under such circumstances viewed by the American mass media?
Then sometime last week, someone phoned USA Today and told the paper. After several days of checking it out, USA Today decided to confront me with the rumors. It put me in the unenviable position of having to lie if I wanted to protect our privacy. No one should have to make that choice. I am sorry that I have been forced to make this revelation now, at this time. After all, I am not running for some office of public trust, nor do I have stockholders to account to.
But tennis has little to do with why we remember him or why we mourn him today. Tony Trabert said of Ashe and the life he led, "I can't imagine he could have lived it any better." And that is true. This was such a good and gentle man. He will be remembered for all the battles of his life, for civil rights here and in South Africa, for his efforts on behalf of young black athletes and especially young black non-athletes. Remembered for his last fight, the fight against AIDS. Like so many other battles, this one too was forced upon him by fate or bad fortune. But once he reluctantly said the words, "I have AIDS," he marched up to the front, where he always seemed to belong, to carry that battle and that burden too.
Music performed by a few African American groups has been viewed as objectionable material in some quarters. Censorship is often the answer by critics to the artistic freedom of these musical artists. Here are two examples students viewed in class pertaining to the Two Live Crew album, As Nasty as They Wanna Be, and Ice-T's Cop Killer.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. 6 sheriff's deputies burst into a record store in Fort Lauderdale, Florida this afternoon, handcuffed and arrested the owner. His crime? Selling a record album to an undercover detective. No regret? No regret. The The album is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. No, wait. The album is actually called As Nasty as They Wanna Be by the rap music group Two Live Crew. It's a bestseller, over 1.7 million sold. But on Wednesday, a Florida federal judge ruled it obscene, quote, an appeal to the loins, not the intellect. And the local sheriff declared, if you sell it, you're going to jail. Here's a little taste of the album video. Body Count is produced by Warner Records, a division of the Time Warner Media conglomerate, which also owns a big chunk of CNN. Both President Bush and Vice President Quayle have condemned Time Warner.
It is wrong for a powerful, influential corporation like Time Warner to make money off a record that says it's okay to kill cops.
Police groups are pushing a boycott of the company's products until Body Count is removed from stores. Charlton Heston, Moses himself, challenged Time Warner's president last week at the company's annual shareholder meeting.
I wonder what Mr. Levin would say if that song I just read folks from were titled Fag Killer, or if the lyrics went die, 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 kite, die. Would Time Warner still sell it?
Media self-analysis of its role in fostering racial tension has been the subject of much research by students in both introductory and advanced broadcast journalism courses. There was no greater introspection by reporters, particularly those who work in television, concerning their roles in covering the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Critical analysis of media coverage by students is necessary to understand why an African-American perspective in the Rodney King case may differ from those of Caucasians or immigrants.
TV had given us violence live and in living color on days 1 and 2. On day 3, Friday, it was live despair throughout the dial. Lines of people trying to get assistance checks from the post office. The despair of a woman finding out what was left of her business.
Everybody's affected by this.
Friday's TV drama continued with a shaken Rodney King.
Can we all get along?
Again, despair was the tone of it all. I remember most the TV image of a business person saying, okay, take it all. Please just don't break the cases.
Don't break anything, okay?
Seeing how African-American leaders like Malcolm X were viewed by the mainstream media in the 1960s gives students a chance to see an individual they have seen little of.
During the pilgrimage, I had many different occasions when I would be involved with persons who would be considered white in America, who would be called white. They had blue eyes, blonde hair, and white skin. Yet they themselves didn't act like American whites act toward non-whites.
He got off of the racist rhetoric, and he got on to all human beings being people we ought to love, and that was a good message. I don't think that he lost, however, the fieriness that I felt was very important, where he expressed his view of the oppression that took place for African Americans at the time.
The specific topic of minority role models has been addressed on some television talk programs. Here, the subject for discussion is whether or not The Cosby Show accurately reflects the African-American lifestyle.
Claire and Cliff Huxtable, two very likable, fun-loving, successful, good parents. Why do you say they're as negative as Amos and Andy?
One, I don't say that they're as negative as Amos and Andy in the documentary. I think that simplifies it a bit. What I'm trying to say is that when we look at images, particularly images that we find very comforting, reassuring, entertaining, heartwarming, we still should ask the question, how does this image work? Not simply within my living room or within my bedroom, but how does this image work, function within the larger political, social arena?
The area of television advertising has become one in which many African Americans are featured, Michael Jordan in particular. But a new advertising format is drawing a great deal of attention towards the needs of African American consumers. Infomercials, in reality 30-minute television commercials, are featuring minorities as hosts and distributors of various products.
There are dozens of my girlfriends used to suffer from problems like acne, blemishes, spots, and discoloration. And let's not forget about the men. They as well had all of these problems added to shaving bumps. Nothing was available that would solve all those problems before, but the Edgar Morris system is changing all of that. Edgar has spent over 20 years perfecting his system, and now, after thousands of people have been helped in his exclusive Hollywood skincare clinic, he's finally formulated a system to use at home.
What's great about Edgar's products is that you can get a whole kit that will do everything you need it to do.
For broadcast journalism majors to be as well-rounded as possible professionally upon graduation, they must perform a number of news writing and producing assignments in all courses. Role models from local network news affiliates give majors an opportunity to critique their overall performances, in addition to chronicling minority hiring patterns at these stations. Of particular importance here is making sure African American students understand how they may be viewed in a largely Caucasian marketplace. Videotapes from African American professionals in broadcasting and print journalism show that while there has been progress in hiring and promotion, a glass ceiling still exists in some areas.
New York anchorwoman Sheila Steinbach agrees that in the last decade, management has lost its commitment to recruiting minorities. She says the doors were wide open for blacks in the 70s, but that changed dramatically in the 1980s.
And all of a sudden, I think for black people in general, those doors seem to fly shut, or we seem to hit that ceiling a little bit sooner. We weren't moving as far and as fast as we did, and I think it happened in the early 80s. A lot of people connected to the Reagan years, I don't know, with the conservative feel in the country, that it was no longer important to make and keep your minority commitment.
Where TV newsrooms have lacked in their commitment to blacks, they seem to have made up for in terms of women. Not women reporters, but anchors. A recent study shows women constitute 41% of network anchors. Still, white males take the lead when it comes to filing stories on network newscasts. The latest statistics reveal white men file 91% of the stories, while women overall only cover 14%, and blacks and other minorities 5% or less.
Students enrolled in the Southern Arkansas University Advanced Electronic News Gathering course have unique opportunities to see their reports viewed by a wide audience. Student-produced university news reports are seen on KTVE-TV, the NBC affiliate in Monroe, Louisiana. They are also seen on AgNet, a national satellite network in Houston, Texas. African American students are able to see how careers of minority students who preceded them were launched in part from the exposure their television reports produced.
Well, when you think of cafeteria food, tasty delights may not necessarily come to mind, but one area university is trying to change all that.
Students at Southern Arkansas University have experienced a change in their food service this year. During registration, university officials made sure each student with a meal plan had a barcode placed on their student ID. As students enter the cafeteria, they pass a checkpoint where a computer checks each ID for verification. Although student complaints concerning the cafeteria have not completely disappeared, the addition of an alternative to dorm food allows flexibility in meal selection. Pandy's Pizza, a pilot restaurant of professional food management, is located at the corner of North Jackson and Sioux Street. Despite initial problems with mixing up student orders, reviews on Pandy's Pizza have been generally positive.
The more that you can offer a student, the happier and more satisfied that student will be. You know, anytime you can improve and add, especially a school of art as small as we are, it's always a good impact on it.
Even with the addition of Pandy's Pizza, students at the university are still at ease with the SAU meal plan, and are content with going to get their meals in the Bruce Center, which is where the cafeteria is located.
The food on the cafeteria for the number of students that are being enrolled and the increase in that, there has been an improvement with the cafeteria food on campus.
With SAU Magnolia's student enrollment slowly increasing, Pandy's Pizza could prove to be a profitable venture in the long run. It, along with the varied cafeteria menu, is bringing students more variety in food selection. This is Sean George reporting for Region 10 News.
The Southern Arkansas University stories are written and produced by the faculty and students from the Department of Theater and Communications and can be seen on KTVE each weekend and also on our AM program.
As you have seen, the broadcast journalism sequence at Southern Arkansas University has been tailored to address the needs and concerns of African American majors. Classroom critical thinking skills, media role models, real-world assignments, and numerous research papers allow African American students to enhance their marketability. Graduates have gone on to successful careers in broadcasting or have entered graduate schools in the region. The importance of minority role models in a higher education mass communication curriculum is a subject which must be addressed in broadcast journalism courses. The results give all college and university students, regardless of race, greater perspective on issues which they will be reporting on at some time in their professional careers.
You can go ahead and turn off, Bob. And of course that conclusion pretty much speaks for itself.
Our last presenter for the day is Gary Deaton at Pennsylvania University.
Thanks, Jay. And I'd also like to thank Bob, who helped me with some discussion about the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. I think there are 4 areas that I'd like to discuss. The first thing is the issue of target audience. The second would be functions. The third would be effects. And the final area would be uses in teaching. So I think the most interesting issue that came to my mind originally is the idea of target audience. Because what you're dealing with here is you're saying, okay, if this is targeted, if gay and lesbian journalism, if it's targeted at that particular population, the 3 issues that I think come up are breadth, depth, and diversity. Because while you are talking about an audience who has something that makes it similar or gives it some similarity, you're also talking about vastly different people in a lot of other areas and other aspects of their lives. So it might be difficult in terms of that breadth issue for the different publications to target their audience effectively or to accurately interpret what it is that their audience wants from them and needs. On the other hand, with regard to depth, what that allows a publication to do is say, okay, we know there are issues that relate to the specific reason that we gathered this target audience or that we targeted this group, and so we can develop we can take some areas and develop them in much more detail than mainstream media is going to be willing to do. So that might be where the greatest benefit comes from. And then with regard to diversity, again, that there are all these other demographic factors to take into consideration that would determine content and style and et cetera in creating these journalistic efforts. And then in terms of functions, there seem to be a variety of functions that are being accomplished by these kinds of writings. And the first one would be that there's lots of information about medical resources, especially regarding the issue of AIDS. So this is a place to go to learn about, or these are places to go to learn about this information. Secondly, there's obviously a political connection. So with the depth issue, these are 2 of the depth issues that I was talking about. And there's a connection to who are the political action committees, who are the entities that are working in the areas that are related to the gay and lesbian lifestyle, that are political concerns, things like in our state this year we've been dealing with a gay, quote-unquote, gay marriage bill, and so that would be an issue. The issues of health care, how do cohabiting partners who are not heterosexual married partners, how do you deal with that issue? And so finding out about maybe creating awareness of issues that someone might not originally be aware of, and then even if you are already aware of the issue itself, finding a way to let you know what's going on with regard to that in the systemic agenda, who are the people who are working, who are the advocates, who are the opponents, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is another depth issue. A concern that kind of goes along with the function, but is sort of a hierarchy. Where is the credibility? This goes back to something Bob was talking about a lot. And that is, how does one determine who are credible sources and who are less credible sources, especially if you are first looking at these kinds of resources, because we've sort of grown up with being learning about, well, what kind of product is, for example, a U.S. News versus a Time versus Mother Jones versus the New Republic, et cetera, et cetera. So we have kind of a parameter for who they are and where they're credible and where their sort of biases are, et cetera. But this is getting into a new area where we might have to be concerned about, well, who is credible? Who are the good sources? And who are the sources that maybe aren't so strong? And so just like when you go to the internet, as Bob discussed, you have to be aware of that. A fourth thing, and this is one of the potential negative functions of this, is that some of these publications use their opportunity, use the ear, if you will, or the eye of the receiver to harm their enemies. So rather than being journalistic, they go into attack mode. Or it's a way, and one of the ways that attack is accomplished is a forced out. We saw Arthur Ashe talk about how his AIDS was forced out by about USA Today. So mainstream media forcing this revelation that he didn't want to have out there. And so sometimes these types of journalistic efforts will go to an attack mode, and they'll out somebody that didn't want to be outed, or they will really make efforts to, in other ways, ruin the people that they perceive to be their enemies. And so that's a potential negative function. One of the an additional potential positive is the interaction with popular culture. There's been a real effort to increase Hollywood's awareness of an audience for gay and lesbian films, or films that feature gay and lesbian characters, et cetera. And one of the things that seems to me anyway that Hollywood has become aware of is that you don't have to make the movie about gay homosexuality or lesbianism. You don't have to make it about characters who are focused on characters who are in that lifestyle, but rather what tends to be happening instead, I think more and more, is that there are characters in a story that's about something else who happen to be gay. And so that has probably been, in terms of normalizing, if you will, or creating greater awareness, that's probably been the most positive step in terms of Hollywood's approach. Sixth function that's accomplished is this whole sort of storytelling, sort of narrative about what's it like, what is this lifestyle, where people are sharing their experiences. And this is a model that's utilized in a lot of other resources. Earlier it was mentioned that Bob mentioned the whole Promise Keepers phenomenon, and certainly in that area, in the area David would have been talking about had he been here, there are a lot of resources that talk about, well, what's it like to live the Christian life, or what's it like to live this kind of lifestyle, what does it mean to